Welcome and aloha. I'm Mark Shklov, the host of ThinkTech Hawaii's Law Across the Sea program. Today we're going across the turbulent and unpredictable cyber seas of ransomware and cryptocurrency, both of which have recently been in the news a lot. My guest is Glenn Melchinger. Glenn is a Hawaii attorney who is counsel at the Honolulu office of the Denton's law firm. Glenn's practice focuses on resolution of complex disputes, especially those involving computer systems, electronic evidence, and technology. Aloha, Glenn. Good to see you. I thank you for sharing your expertise. But before I start asking you questions, please preface your answers.
Thank you, Mark. Aloha. It's good to see you again. And greetings to everybody who might be tuning in. I'm counsel with Denton's in the Honolulu office, and I just want to preface by saying, essentially, I'm not giving legal advice here. So the opinions expressed are not those of my firm or my family, my daughter, my pets, or anybody else. Maybe not even mine a month from now, who knows? And we will be talking a little bit about cryptocurrency today as well, but none of this is intended as any kind of investment advice. And everybody who is considering purchasing cryptocurrency or doing anything with it should consult a proper investment advisor. And I'm not making any recommendations about that. But with that, there's a lot to cover today. So, Mark, where do you want to start?
Well, let's start with a little basic and simple background for folks like me who've heard a lot about ransomware and cryptocurrency recently, and it's been in the news, but we don't really understand what they are. So first, what is ransomware? What does it do?
Right. It has been a lot in the news, especially in the past month. We'll get into some of those topics, I think. But at its essence, ransomware is a type of malware. It's computer software that gets onto your system, and it basically makes your data inaccessible in the simplest terms. It employs an encryption algorithm, and unless you have the proper encryption keys to decrypt your files, you can lose access to them. And obviously, when the computer systems can no longer read their own files because they're encrypted by this type of malware, they cease to function. And typically what happens is you'll be alerted to this by some kind of a screen that appears, and it says, "Hi, your files are now not yours anymore, and you need to pay us in some amount of money in order for you to get them back." So in the simplest terms, that's what you're talking about.
Okay, well, still trying to keep it simple, how does it infect your systems? How does that work?
Right. So there's two main ways, and one of them is obviously risky behavior. If you have lack of care, and that could be you don't have the latest patches installed on your system, you don't have an antivirus software, you don't have up-to-date programs, or you just have a system that has vulnerabilities, or if you have employees who click on links that they shouldn't, the sort of we're talking a little bit earlier about World War II issues. So this is the loose clicks, sink ships type of scenario, where if you take your computer to the wrong website, or you go on sort of spammy sites where sometimes this malware is lurking, then you can get it on your system and it can take over. The other means is if you're targeted by somebody who's a bad actor.
And it's kind of become a business in a way, hasn't it? I mean, it seems to be newly developing every day. What's that about?
Right. Well, and that's something that's, over the past month, I think there's been a lot more reporting on this with the Colonial pipeline ransomware attack and the other types of attacks that we've been seeing in the news. Um, Essentially, you have a situation where there is somebody who develops the ransomware. In the Colonial pipeline case, I believe it's called Dark Side, and they are basically the software developer. They license it out in essence. Obviously, it's not a formal license that's protected by a contract that's enforceable in a court or anything like that. But for the most part, they are, for a fee, giving the use of this tool to criminal agencies who then can use it to go ahead and attack certain targets. So it really is a business model in that way. And from what I understand, you if you are indeed hacked and hit with ransomware, there's some cases where you don't know how to buy Bitcoin, so you don't know how to go ahead and get the cryptocurrency that they want to be paid in, and they may have a telephone number or some way to communicate so that you can learn about that. So it's not tech support in the traditional sense, but it is certainly part of that business model that supports them getting payment, right? So there's a far more evolved set of actors, and the bar to entry is not really your coding ability or ability to develop the software anymore. It's not the developers who are necessarily doing all of the criminal activity. It's being farmed out to groups with intent.
Wow. Wow. Now you mentioned cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. What is that? I mean, I've heard of it. I've had a lot of people talk to me about it, and they say I bought some, and but what is it? I mean, can you explain it? And what are some examples?
Sure. Cryptocurrency is based on a technology called blockchain, and I think a lot of people have probably heard over the past 2 or 3 years a lot about blockchain technology. A blockchain is at its base a sort of distributed ledger that is across several nodes around the world. Now, what does that mean? Think of it as sort of, you have an Excel spreadsheet that's placed on your computer. It's more complicated than that. It's protected with certain, safeguards and encryption, perhaps. But it lists all the transactions that have been on that blockchain, and it's essentially an immutable record. And unlike, say, a centralized agency that's holding this official information, the design of the blockchain is that it's distributed, meaning it's all over. If you had to try and change a record on it, you would have to change it on all the nodes, which is essentially impossible. And that's the protection, and that's the beauty that people see in it. There are sort of pro blockchain evangelists, and there are people who are using it for what's developed out of it, which is cryptocurrency, which is your first question. Bitcoin has been a lot in the news, but it's a digital currency. Today it's trading at something like $35,000 per coin, but it varies. It's been up to 65 or so $1,000 recently. But what it is perhaps a little hard to explain. Its simplest form, it's a bit of software which is recognized and trusted by others who have bought into the system enough that it gives you liquidity into dollars, and it can be used for payments and transactions. There's lots of different types of cryptocurrency that are developing. They're increasingly coming under regulatory scrutiny because of the involvement with ransomware, the sort of the way it's being used.
Right, right. Now, and I've heard that the cryptocurrency and ransomware are connected because the cryptocurrency is used or demanded to be used by the people making the demands to pay ransom to the ransomware hackers. And how does that work?
Right, right. So, if you go back to, and why did that develop that way? And why has ransomware risen to become the threat that it is? They're kind of symbiotically related, if you will. The first, when I was looking at the history of this, the first ransomware package was something in the 90s delivered by floppy disk to people. And it was called the AIDS Trojan, or so nicknamed, because it purported to be information about the AIDS virus back then, which is, a big thing. People stuck it in their computers and they got a screen that said, "Hi, you can't access your data anymore. Send money to this address in Panama." Now it's a physical address. You can see the limitations in that from a law, enforcement perspective. Obviously, it'd be much better to be able to run to a physical address and watch the mailbox for payments or whoever's picking up. But ransomware, the beauty of it is it operates, or I'm sorry, the cryptocurrency aspect of it is it operates anywhere. There are people who are trying to use cryptocurrency to do wonderful things. There's a website that will ask you to take on certain coding tasks and will pay you in Bitcoin or Ethereums or what have you if you achieve that and you send in your work digitally. And that, the purpose of that website, 1729.com, for anybody who might be interested, is, it's a wonderful model. It's designed to find the next math genius out in the middle of nowhere with a resource poor environment who might be waiting, to make tremendous contributions to humanity. But for everything that has a positive side, or any tool where people have great ideas, there's also other uses. In this case, cryptocurrency, obviously, right, it can be used to anonymously get payment, and it gives the criminals, liquidity at the end of the day. So they can, get some payment and get away with it, and you don't have to deal with, the international law enforcement agencies trying to find where the money in an account went and tracing it to you.
Okay, well, yeah, and that's what I've heard has happened. And let's focus on specific recent news stories. Let's take a look at the Colonial pipeline case. Tell us what that was about. And I understand that cryptocurrency was how the ransom was paid, but tell us what that was about.
Right. So, and I'll just pull up a couple other notes. I think it makes sense to also look a little bit at the Jbs hack on the, it's one of the largest meat producers in the world. And so, the interesting thing about the past week or month is that people are finally, I hesitate to say waking up, because there've been wake up calls back to 2018 and WannaCry and NotPetya and a lot of other ransomware that's done billions of dollars worth of damage. But in this case, we have people's gas bills and their ability to buy meat or put something on the table because of price increases potentially, or shortages being affected. And all of us like to be able to drive where we want to drive, or grill or eat, obviously. So these are concerns, and it's critical infrastructure. So that's why this stuff is more in the news than a lot of other businesses. But critically, hospitals, schools, local governments, a host of other, thousands of small businesses have been attacked. And more and more frequently, obviously, the attackers go after people with ability to pay, which are businesses. So Colonial Pipeline is obviously, and I think I don't want to repeat too much of the news for everybody who's read it. It's a 5,000 or 5,500 mile pipeline. It has products of various kinds, jet fuel to gasoline, that run down its course to various customers. But one of the real sort of elephants in the room, perhaps, is why, if say, and I think it may be reported in some instances that it's the billing systems that were actually compromised. Why is it that you can't just keep sending stuff down the pipeline, and why do you have to have shortages and so on? For anybody who's interested, I would recommend there's a SANS Institute. It's SANS. There's a YouTube presentation that came out in mid-May on this, and they go for an hour on how ransomware infection of a outward, customer-facing or internet-facing Windows system can affect the OT, not the IT, but the operating technology, and the machines on the floor of the plant that are either, if you're JBS, they're processing chicken, or if they're your Colonial pipeline, they're refining some product and getting it ready for delivery to a customer or something like that. So a lot of those systems may have been mid-process and they're looking to report back up to the main system, and it says, I'm ready to deliver this. What do I do next? And then the system above it is not responding. And because it's encrypted and subject to ransomware, or it's been deliberately shut down ahead of time so that people can get ahead of the infection. So there's a lot of things I think people have learned over the past, or been thinking about more actively over the past month, because these sort of sources of gasoline, sources of meat, and so on have been dramatically affected by ransomware infection. It's probably hit only basically the Windows systems that aren't even on the production floor. So the situation is that I think because of these, people are aware now that this is really a critical infrastructure issue. It's a national security issue. Again, I think it was back in 2017, 2018 with NotPetya. That was certainly a wake-up call too. But at least it sounds like we're finally getting towards a place where there's a law enforcement and an interest in the government actors and industry to try and communicate better about this and coordinate the response.
Well, yeah, and let me ask you, how has, or what has the government response been on ransomware and cryptocurrency? How are they responding, and how is the government, based on these current events that are really affecting your daily life? I mean, the delivery of fuel and the delivery of food. How is the government responding, and what advice is being given?
Yeah, and I think luckily this is something has finally caught the attention of the nation and the people who are in a position to fix this. I hope. I saw one person who was involved in cybersecurity complained he was driving around. He realized, oh, there's no gas at this station. Oh, there's no gas at this station. And by the time he got to the third one, he finally realized, oh, that's what this is. I'm being hit with what happened with Colonial. And it's on the East Coast, of course. But what's happening is there's a lot more discussion. I think there's a new executive order from the Biden administration that's come out, and in large part, it talks about making sure that people start information sharing, trying to, part of the order, I think, addresses some of the things that happened last year, towards the end of the year, and I won't go into the details of it, but the SolarWinds attack from an IT provider who's a vendor for a lot of government agencies, basically the contention, I think, of the intelligence community is, and the attribution of the intelligence community is that this is a national actor somewhere in Russia who inserted some of these, malware into the update chain, so that when companies went to update their software, they ended up infected. And it was an intelligence gathering thing. It was not necessarily a ransomware attack or anything else. But we don't know what information they now have from our government systems, and the systems are not secure. So, part of this EO addresses that, because it starts to say, look, if you're a vendor in the supply chain, you have to start doing better. And it's trying to start setting some kind of new norms for agencies talking to one another to share information. Because if you have HDS, DHS, I'm sorry, over some working on one issue, or you have somebody else in another sector working on another issue. And curiously, Colonial Pipeline, for example, comes under the TSA in terms of regulation right now. So each thing is sort of sector by sector and siloed in a way. How do you overcome that and have a wider conversation on who's backing what and how do we go after them and how do we prioritize it? Those are the conversations that are starting to occur, as well as starting, I think, to look at more regulation of the cryptocurrency space so that you've got better controls. Traditional, if they're operating sort of like a bank, you can apply KYC, know your customer type requirements on them, so that at least as to the exchange or the cryptocurrency exchange or whoever's doing that, or somebody will know who is buying all this Bitcoin or who is receiving them, perhaps. Or they're not letting bad actors into the system. I don't know exactly how you implement that in this case. There's a lot of difficulties ahead, but at least there's a start on getting the discussion going.
And it seems like they've recognized this as a real business, a criminal enterprise, and the government may be taking some action. And does this, with respect to the cryptocurrencies, what's happening there? I've heard that the price goes up and down, and is that being addressed in a similar fashion as the ransomware by the government, or how is that being dealt with?
Yeah, and there's such a broad. It's hard to make too many sweeping statements about that, just because there are multiple exchanges, there's multiple vendors, there's multiple state regulators. We don't really have it in Hawaii, I think, for a number of reasons, because, for example, our finance department said basically you have to have a one-to-one hold currency in the same ratio as you hold the aggregate value of the cryptocurrency assets, which, as you know, can go up and down. So maybe you need only $1 million to secure that and comply on Friday, but on Monday you're going to need 1.5 or something like that. It makes it sort of untenable. So it depends a lot on who's doing the regulation, I think. But
is there an attempt to regulate it?
I'm not prepared to speak to any particular attempt to look at a particular exchange, but I think there's a general discussion in the context of ransomware of how do you, I think from law enforcement perspective, how do you actually seize some of those assets when it's an intangible digital asset, and how do you enforce or prevent the transference, and just better visibility into those systems and better controls. If it's acting like essentially it's fintech and it's finance of some kind. There's financial systems have tons of regulations imposed on them for visibility, and so trying to import some of that, I think, generally speaking, onto the cryptocurrency space is a lot of what's happening, because a lot of the cryptocurrency space, unfortunately, it seems to be used for this type of thing, payments, and a lot of it is not reported either. So trying to get somebody to report when ransomware is being, when ransoms are being paid, et cetera. All of that's very important. I'd point at the end of April, there's a report that came out from the it's a ransomware task force, the Institute for Security and Technology, and they had several stats in the beginning executive summary of their presentation, but the effects of this are, you have 21 average days, and this is just averages, 21 days downtime for the average business hit by ransomware. 287 days is the average it takes for a business to fully come back. And so you're talking, a very long tail in trying to implement new internal standards or bring your systems back up to where they were. Think of think of, all the configurations you might have on your own desktop, where if your desktop crashes and suddenly your Outlook window is in another panel and you didn't know where it went, or it's off screen or whatever. It's like, how annoying is that? Well, that multiplied by, 10,000 computers in a large organization, plus the actual configurations that let them access the network securely and all these other sorts of things, you sort of consider how long it might take for that. There's 350 million apparently in 2020 paid in ransom alone.
Wow.
That's probably understated, because who knows how many people were not
Right.
reporting, and there's not a great mechanism for reporting right now for that. And then the average payment is also, as they know, gone up. From 2019, it's a 171% increase up to $312,493 on average payment. And that doesn't necessarily include the amount of time and labor that you're spending for the 287 days after the event in preparing for the next event, creating an IR, an incident response plan, and doing all the other things you need to make sure your system is, again, secure and that you can handle customer information, card information, et cetera.
In the few minutes we have left, I want you to answer a couple brief questions.
I'll try. So yes, sorry.
What does the future look like? One, and two, is there anything positive we can learn from ransomware?
I think, the silver lining for this is really, ransomware has brought to our attention more rapidly in the past month the general need for cybersecurity overhauls, especially in a world where you have nation-state actors trying to tackle businesses. We have the OPM hack, if anyone wants to read about that, in 2015 and other events, really have been calls for action. And now it seems finally, we're finally getting some action. I think if you can ultimately create a risk profile or in an environment in which people can understand what the risks are, we may actually have a cybersecurity insurance industry that survives as well, because who knows how long they'll be around if things keep ballooning out of control, et cetera. So I think there's an opportunity for a lot of people to come together and really coalesce on this. One brief point is, earlier in the year, the Emotet botnet, Emotet rather, I think it is, was taken down by an international coalition of law enforcement. They went in and seized servers and backups and things to prevent them from coming back up. But that removed a large architecture for making these kind of attacks. So there is precedence for this, and we can only hope people keep taking it seriously and make the effort for everybody. So.
And it sounds like there's been a wake-up call finally that has roused the government and people to take a more detailed and straightforward action to try to prevent this.
I think that's fair. There's really the clarion call for action and coming together, across the aisle, across borders. It's a borderless problem. So, let's see what we can all do together to address it in a good way.
Yeah, that may be something positive. Maybe it'll bring people and companies and countries maybe together. Well, Glenn, I want to. If you have anything further you'd like to say?
No, I think we're good. So
okay. Well, thank you for being my guest today. I know this is a big subject we could probably talk for hours about, but I appreciate you giving us your insight, especially. This is a real current news item, and it's good to get some background and a little bit more understanding. And thank you for that. I appreciate it. Mahalo and aloha. We'll talk to you later. Hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Likewise, mahalo and aloha to everybody and to you.
All right. So thank you. That'll conclude our program for today.